Thanks. With Pastor Ladena Bough.
Good morning. My name's Pastor Ladena Bough, and I want to thank you this morning for joining me on Trials and Triumphs. At the moment, we are discussing the transing of our children and what our school systems and state laws have to say about the situation. My personal opinion, as most of you know, is that no child is born in the wrong body, and to feed into that particular delusion and start puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones on a child is nothing short of child abuse. We need to let our kids be kids and stop this rush to do something that is going to physically harm them and turn them into permanent patients at best or kill them at worst. We started this current discussion talking about GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. I want to discuss GLSEN some more and tie that in with the information from transathlete.com and how these policies are affecting the females in our schools. Next week, we will finish up this portion and then return to the WPATH documentation and leaks that tell us that the gender-affirming care specialists are simply using your children as test subjects for their Mengele-type experiments on our youth. If you don't have any idea who Dr. Mengele was, he was a German SS officer who did horrible experiments on the Jewish people during World War II and earned the title the Angel of Death. As GLSEN was founded by a group of teachers in 1990, who professed to know in advance of the current situation in our nation that educators play key roles in creating affirming learning environments for LGBTQ plus youth. But as well as activating supportive educators, GLSEN believes they provide centering and uplifting student-led movements which have powered initiatives like the Day of Silence, Ally Week, and more. These educators profess to conduct extensive and original research to inform our evidence-based solutions for K-12 education. That's a quote from them, evidence-based solution. They also author developmentally appropriate resources, quote, for educators to use throughout their school community. GLSEN professes to advise on, advocate for, and research comprehensive policies designed to protect LGBTQ plus students as well as students of marginalized identities. And GLSEN brought forth record support to the Safe School Improvement Act and Student Non-Discrimination Act and fought discriminatory legislation, that's their term, not mine, okay, discriminatory legislation, in over 15 states. They profess to empower students to effect change by supporting student-led efforts to positively impact their own schools and local communities and have thousands of registered GSAs nationwide. GSAs, if you remember, are gay-straight alliances, clubs in our schools that, probably don't need to be there. But today, GLSEN's national network is more than 1.5 million strong, with students, families, educators, and education advocates working to create safe schools. More than 500,000 GLSEN resources are downloaded by students and educators each year. GLSEN also advocates for policies that ensure that transgender, non-binary, and intersex students have equal opportunities to participate in all K-12 school sports in a way that aligns with their gender identity. They even have a map on their website that examines state policies impacting equal opportunity to participate in school sports consistent with gender identity, with a focus on high school interscholastic athletic participation. At last count, 15 states and Washington, D.C. have policies and or guidance affirming equal opportunity to participate in all K-12 school sports consistent with an individual's gender identity. Those states are California, Colorado, Connecticut, the District of Columbia, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. 2 states and 5 territories have not adopted policies or issued guidance on participation consistent with gender identity in K-12 interscholastic athletics. As such, the participation of transgender, non-binary, and intersex students in interscholastic athletics is left to individual districts, schools, or administrators who may use inclusive criteria, exclusionary criteria, or fully prohibit participation consistent with gender identity. 10 states have adopted policies or issued guidance on school sports participation consistent with gender identity that impose restrictions on the participation of transgender, non-binary, and intersex students in high school or secondary school interscholastic athletics. I personally believe that allowing males to participate in designated female sports categories is dangerous and is another attempt to erase women in our society. I wholeheartedly condemn the practice of allowing males in our girls' restrooms, locker rooms, or sports competitions. They have an unfair advantage over the girls and need to stay in their lane. 24 states have enacted what GLSEN describes as, quote, discriminatory laws categorically banning participation in high school or secondary sports consistent with gender identity. GLSEN has also participated in several lawsuits that are currently challenging these laws. While K-12 policies vary by state and school district, the recommendation for K-12 inclusion of transgender students is for transgender youth to be allowed to play sports in their affirmed gender. The Transgender Law and Policy Institute document Guidelines for Creating Policies for Transgender Children in Recreational Sports says, quote, all young people should have the opportunity to play recreational sports and have their personal dignity respected. Transgender young people, are no different. In fact, because transgender young people often must overcome significant stigma and challenges, it would be particularly harmful to exclude them from the significant physical, mental, and social benefits that young people gain by playing recreational sports. The impact of such discrimination can be severe and can cause lifelong harm. In contrast, permitting transgender children and youth to participate in recreational sports in their affirmed gender can provide an enormous boost to their self-confidence and self-esteem and provide them with positive experiences that will help them in all areas of their lives. I must disagree because research has shown that socially transitioning affects a child's brain, especially the younger you do it. It makes it difficult for them to grow through puberty without being negatively influenced to continue on a transition path simply because that's what their brain has been programmed to accept. I again say, leave the kids alone. In addition, over the last year or so, it seems that if a young man grows a ponytail, he can call himself a girl and invade the girls' locker rooms, play on the girls' teams, physically injure female players, and as long as that volleyball team, for example, wins, all is good. No one is counting the injuries inflicted by those boys in excess of 6 foot tall and very muscular inflict upon the real females, including the injuries inflicted on their own teammates. GLSEN advocates for policies that ensure that transgender, or trans, and non-binary students can participate in sports on a team or in a competition based on their gender identity. There are 16 states, including Washington, D.C., that have friendly policies that help facilitate the full inclusion of trans and non-binary students in high school athletics. They work with the people at transathlete.com to push this agenda. Consequently, they are sowing division among our student athletes and appear to have an unfair advantage over other students as we cater to the current mass delusion in our nation. There are 6 states with guidance that exclude trans and non-binary students by requiring students to participate in athletics based upon their birth certificate or their sex assigned at birth. My side note, your sex is not assigned at birth. You were born either male or female, and your anatomy is quite well seen by doctors, nurses, and parents alike, so there is no need to assign anything at birth. Another 3 states bar trans and non-binary students from participation unless they have undergone surgery. Okay, we're talking K through 12 here. Okay, stop mutilating children. But what GLSEN terms as, quote, discriminatory restriction policies that create additional barriers to inclusion of trans and non-binary students, unquote, are in place in 16 states. Finally, there are 10 states that have not issued any statewide guidance on best practices that should be implemented in schools, leaving students to navigate the patchwork of policies that differ between local education agencies and schools in the state. Additionally, some states have passed what GLSEN describes as discriminatory legislation, barring gender-affirming participation of transgender student athletes and only allows students to compete on teams based on the sex listed on an existing birth certificate. This began with HB 500 in Idaho in 2020, and since then a rash of similar bills have been introduced in more than 30 states. Furthermore, the governor of South Dakota has issued a state ban via executive order. The Idaho law is currently being challenged in federal court under the title Hecox versus Little. Several high school state association policies are friendly to trans and non-binary students participating in sports based upon their gender identity. These include California, Connecticut, Colorado, Florida, but a state law has been signed there that contradicts the high school association's policy, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, South Carolina, but there again, a state law has been signed that contradicts the high school association's policy, Vermont, Washington State, and Washington, D.C. 3 states have athletic policies that require an individual to have sex reassignment surgery in order to participate in high school sports. Those are Indiana, Kentucky, and Louisiana, but there are lawsuits in each of these states to reverse these policies. A number of states have high school athletic policies that say you can only play on teams according to the sex shown on your birth certificate. These include Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, New Mexico, and Texas. Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho, and Texas all have signed state laws that contradict what the high school association's policies say. States with no state policy with regard to high school athletics are Hawaii, Kansas, Michigan, Mississippi, Montana, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and West Virginia, with state laws signed in Kansas, Mississippi, Montana, Tennessee, and West Virginia that contradict what the high school association policies say. The high school athletic policies for a number of states restrict a trans athlete from participation in their self-identified gender, which include Arizona, Delaware, Illinois, Iowa, Maine, Missouri, Nebraska, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Utah, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. State laws barring trans athletes from competing in their self-identified gender category have been passed or debated so far in Arizona, Iowa, Missouri, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. States with laws banning trans youth from participating in their chosen gender classification have already been passed in Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. You can track these sites and updates for this insanity on the GLSEN website or transathlete.com. In Alabama, for example, the state law passed in 2021. Accordingly, the Alabama High School Athletic Association says participation in athletics should be determined by the gender indicated on the student-athlete's certified certificate of birth. I cannot wholeheartedly agree more. On April 23, 2021, Governor Kay Ivey signed into law HB 391, which establishes different sports categories fixed by sex in K-12 public schools and bars athletes assigned male at birth from participating in the girls category under any circumstances. It also prohibits athletes assigned female at birth from participating in boys' sports unless there is no comparable girls' opportunity, one example being football. Alaska's Department of Health and Early Development adopted a regulation categorically banning participation consistent with gender identity. The Alaska School Activities Association's policy, that's ASAA, states that athletes must be assigned female at birth to participate in female sports teams, and that was effective on 10/12 of 23. Arizona, a state law passed in 2022 that bars trans athletes from participating in sports based on their gender identity. It went back to what you were born with. This is all being assessed, especially in light of Joe Biden trying to expand Title IX to include trans-identifying individuals. That Title IX order that President Biden put through is now on hold everywhere, pending all the lawsuits that are going on right now. Under Arizona Interscholastic Association, the AIA, policy listed in its 2018 to 2019 AIA Policies and Procedures Handbook, the transgender policy, and states the following. Gender identity participation. All students should have the opportunity to participate in Arizona Interscholastic Association activities in a manner that is consistent with their gender identity, irrespective of the sex listed on a student's birth certificate. For participation in interscholastic athletics or in a gender that does not match the sex at birth, the transgender student must petition the school district to participate based on their gender identity. Once the student has been granted eligibility to participate in interscholastic athletics consistent with the athlete's gender identity, the eligibility is granted for the duration of the student's participation and does not need to be renewed every sports season or school year. All discussion and documentation will be kept confidential, and the proceedings will be sealed unless the student and family make a specific request, unquote. This is all still in the hands of the courts now. Arkansas passed a law in 2021 that bans participation by transgender students. The Arkansas High School Activities Association uses birth certificates as the designator for participation. The policy states Arkansas birth certificates state the sex of the person. The birth certificate is the document the AAA relies upon to determine participation in girls' or boys' activities where applicable. The AAA will accept or a changed birth certificate concerning sex, which is allowed under ACA Section 20-18-307. If a sport is offered for members of each gender, athletes must participate with members of their own gender in district, region, state, or overall competition, except for female athletes who must choose prior to the district conference tournament to waive their opportunity to compete in girls' state competition in order to compete on a boys' team in a district conference or state competition. AAA rules permit girls to play on a football and baseball teams. California, the Interscholastic Federation, CIF policy says all students should have the opportunity to participate in CIF activities in a manner that is consistent with their gender identity, irrespective of the gender listed on a student's records. The student and/or the student's school may seek a review of the student's eligibility for participation in interscholastic athletics in a gender that does not match the gender assigned to him or her at birth, via the following procedures should either the student or the school have questions or need guidance in making the determination. On January 1st, 2014, California Assembly Bill 1216 went into effect, allowing students to participate in athletics and sex-segregated activities in accordance with their gender identity. This law prohibits schools from discriminating on the basis of specified characteristics, including gender, gender identity, and gender expression, and specifies various statements of legislative intent and the policies of the state in that regard. Existing law requires that participation in a particular physical education activity or sport, if required of students of one sex, be available to students of each sex. This bill would require that a pupil be permitted to participate in sex-segregated school programs and activities, including athletic teams and competitions, and use facilities consistent with his or her gender identity, irrespective of the gender listed on the pupil's records. In other words, that boy's going to invade your daughter's locker room. The California Student Safety and Violence Prevention Act of 2000 prohibits discrimination and harassment on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity in all California public schools. The California Safe Schools Coalition, a statewide partnership of organizations and individuals dedicated to eliminating discrimination and harassment on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity in California schools, has detailed model school district policies regarding transgender and gender nonconforming students. The document states, under state law, public schools and non-religious private schools that receive state funding have a legal duty to protect students from discrimination and harassment on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity, or on the basis of association with a person with one or more of these actual or perceived characteristics. The Los Angeles Unified School District has a clear set of guidelines for the inclusion of trans students, which includes specifics about athletic participation and locker room use, as well as addressing students by preferred names and pronouns. The Colorado High School Activities Association, CHSAA, has a policy for trans athletes which states, in order to ensure appropriate gender assignment for purposes of athletic eligibility, a transgender student athlete's home school will perform a confidential evaluation to determine the gender assignment for the prospective student athlete. In a 2014 article, Bethany Brookins, an assistant commissioner at CHSAA, says Colorado's policy is to let transgender student athletes compete as members of whatever gender they self-identify. Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference, CIAC, is committed to providing transgender student athletes with equal opportunities to participate in CIAC athletic programs consistent with their gender identity. Public Act Number 11-55, called an Act Concerning Discrimination, is a Connecticut law effective October 1st, 2011, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender identity or expression in all areas and contexts in which the laws already prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. Connecticut Safe School Coalition has a document called Guidelines for Connecticut Schools to Comply with Gender Identity and Expression Non-Discrimination Laws, which outlines locker room use, sports and gym class assignments, and restroom access for students in a question and answer format. Delaware. The Delaware Interscholastic Athletic Association, the DIAA policy states, a transgender student defined as a student whose gender identity differs from the student's birth sex shall be eligible to participate in interscholastic athletics in a manner that is consistent with the student's gender identity under any of the following conditions. 1. The student provides an official record, such as a revised birth certificate, a driver's license, or a passport, demonstrating legal recognition of the student's reassigned sex. Or 2. A physician certifies that the student has had appropriate clinical treatment for transition to the reassigned sex. Or 3. A physician certifies that the student is in the process of transition to the reassigned sex. 4. The determination of a student's sex assignment for interscholastic athletics shall be made by the student's school. And 5. The determination of a student's sex assignment for interscholastic athletics shall remain in effect for the duration of the student's high school eligibility. Any member school may appeal the eligibility of a transgender student on the grounds that the student's participation in interscholastic athletics would adversely affect competitive equity or safety of teammates or opposing players. Any such appeal will be heard by the DIAA Board of Directors, and the confidentiality of the student shall remain confidential, and at the request of the student's parents, their hearing will be held will be confidential also. Pardon me. Florida. State law passed in 2021 bans participation. The Florida High School Athletic Association policy for gender identity participation in sports states, quote, all eligible students should have the opportunity to participate in interscholastic athletics in a manner that is consistent with their gender identity and expression, irrespective of the gender listed on a student's birth certificate and or records. The Georgia High School Association, GHSA, updated its rules in May of 2022 to reflect that students may participate in school sports only according to the designation on their birth certificate. Hawaii. The Hawaii High School Athletic Association, the HHSAA, has no policy on transgender athlete participation. Schools in Hawaii have guidance on respectful treatment of transgender students, including that schools should recognize and respect a student's gender identity. Students should be able to dress according to their gender identity, and schools should grant transgender students access to whichever bathroom or locker room they feel most comfortable in. However, the guidelines provide no clarity for participation of trans athletes. In March of 2020, Idaho became the first state in the country to make a law to prevent the participation of high school and college athletes who are transgender, called the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, also known as HB 500. The Idaho High School Activities Association policy requires transgender athletes to make a medical transition and allows for participation with the following conditions. One, a female to male transgender student athlete who is taking a medically prescribed hormone treatment under a physician's care for the purposes of gender transition may participate only on a boys' team. A male to female transgender student athlete who is not taking hormone treatment related to gender transition may participate only on a boys' team. A male to female transgender student athlete who is taking medically prescribed hormone treatments under a physician's care for the purpose of gender transition may participate on a boys' team at any time, but must complete 1 year of hormone treatment related to the gender transition before competing on a girls' team. The Illinois High School Association, the IHSA, has a school and association policy regarding transgender student athletes' participation. The school procedure is: 1. The student and/or parents shall contact the school administrator or athletic director at their member school, notifying them that the student has a different gender identity than listed on the student's school registration card or birth certificate, and the student wishes to participate in athletics or activities in a manner consistent with their gender identity. The school shall collect the following for the participation ruling. A. Gender identity used for school registration records. B. Medical documentation, hormonal treatment, sexual reassignment surgery, counseling, medical personnel, etc. And C. Gender identity-related advantages for approved participation. Once the school administrator has collected the relevant information, the member school shall contact the IHSA office in writing of the request for the ruling, the student's gender identity, and the selected athletics and activities that the student would like the opportunity to participate in if they are selected through team tryout process. Once the student is approved, participation is granted through the duration of their high school career, and it does not need to be annually reviewed. Illinois High School Association procedure. IHSA will make final rulings on students' participation. The IHSA will establish a group of medical personnel to act in an advisory role when reviewing rulings. Appealing parties should provide the following documentation: 1. A current transcript and school registration information. 2. Documentation of the student's consistent gender identification. For example, affirmation statements from student, parent, guardian, and/or health provider. And 3. Any other pertinent information. The IHSA will respond to the member school in writing the decision on the participation ruling. Indiana passed a state law in 2022 that bans participation in some respects. The Indiana High School Athletic Association, the IHSAA, rules do not permit transgender or transsexual, cross-dressing, or similar types of student athletes to participate on a member school's team, which is other than the team of the gender which matches the student's birth gender. However, it may be demonstrated that the student's birth gender has changed gender, after which the student may only participate on a team of the changed gender. Proof of a student's changed gender is shown by the following: 1. Providing reliable medical evidence that the student athlete has undergone sex change before puberty, or 2. Providing reliable medical evidence that the student athlete has undergone sex change after puberty, which should include evidence that surgical and anatomical changes have been completed, including genitalia changes and gonadectomy, that all hormonal therapies appropriate for the assigned sex have been administered in a verifiable manner, that sufficient length of time has occurred such as to minimize gender-related advantages, and all legal recognition of the sex change has been conferred with all proper governmental agencies. a copy of the student's amended birth certificate, a court order, or other official state determination showing the student's new gender will suffice. And 3, in addition, to verify a student's changed gender, the student may be required to submit to a confidential case-by-case evaluation by an IHSAA gender committee relative to the gender identity. In other words, drop your pants. Let's see where you're at. Iowa passed a state law in 2022 that bans participation of transgender athletes on the opposite sex teams. The Iowa High School Athletic Association, the IHSAA, do they get enough initials here? Has separate associations for boys and girls. For male athletes, the transgender student at an Iowa High School Athletic Association member school who identifies as male despite having been born with female genitals shall be allowed to fully compete as a male as long as he consistently identifies as a male at school, home, and socially. For female athletes, the transgender student at an Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union member school who identifies as a female despite having been born with male genitals shall be allowed to fully compete as a female as long as she consistently identifies as a female at school, home, and socially, subject to A. Unfortunately, the documentation did not show what A is supposed to be, despite the reference there. Also, the IGHSAU will not make decisions or offer input into specific situations occurring at local school districts. All authority and obligation to abide by and implement Iowa Code Chapter 216 with respect to transgender student athletes will remain with the local school district. Eligibility of a transgender student athlete will be presumed. However, if there arises in the local level a documented eligibility controversy, the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union shall have the authority under the applicable Iowa Administrative Code to determine eligibility. The Code of Iowa clearly delineates unfair practices and discriminatory acts in education. Iowa Section 216.9, Unfair and Discriminatory Practices in Education, reads, 1. It is unfair or discriminatory to practice for any educational institution. It is an unfair or discriminatory practice for any educational institution to discriminate on the basis of race, creed, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, religion, or disability in any program or activity. Such discrimination practices shall include, but not be limited to, the following practices. A. Exclusion of a person or persons from participation in denial of the benefits of or subjection to discrimination in any academic, extracurricular, research, occupational training, or other programs or activities except athletic programs. B. Denial of comparable opportunity in intramural and interscholastic athletic programs. C. Discrimination among persons in employment and the conditions of employment. And D. On the basis of sex, the application of any rule concerning the actual or potential parental, family, or marital status of a person or the exclusion of any person from any program or activity or employment because of pregnancy or related conditions dependent upon the physician's diagnosis and certification. 2. For the purpose of this section, educational institution includes any preschool, elementary, or secondary schools, community college, area education agency, or post-secondary college or university and their governing boards. This section does not provide an educational institution from does not prohibit, an educational institution from maintaining separate toilet facilities, locker rooms, or living facilities for the different sexes, so long as comparable facilities are provided. 3. Nothing in this section shall be construed as prohibiting a bona fide religious institution from imposing qualifications based on religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity when such qualifications are related to a bona fide religious purpose or any institution from admitting students of only one sex. And 4. The Code of Iowa clearly defines gender identity. It reads, when used in this chapter, unless the context otherwise requires, gender identity means a gender-related identity of a person regardless of a person's assigned sex at birth. Kansas. State law passed in 2023 bans participation of transgender athletes. In certain respects, the Kansas State High School Activities Association policy says the school is responsible to determine the appropriate gender team for participation by the student. Once this determination is made, the school is responsible to notify KSHSAA if a student intends to participate on a team opposite their birth gender. Notification must be given prior to entering the student in the KSHSAA eligibility system and allowing participation. KSHSAA handles all disputes. Kentucky passed a law in 2022 that bans participation. According to the trans rights activists, they contend that Kentucky's High School Activities Association's policy is among the worst in the country, requiring student athletes to participate in accordance with their birth certificate or to have gender reassignment surgery. This one I could probably get behind. This policy is specific to eligibility to participate in the privilege of interscholastic activities. Each student athlete shall participate according to the gender as listed on their birth certificate, unless they were legally reassigned. Reassignment may be demonstrated through the use of a birth certificate, driver's license, passport, or other certified medical record as verified to the member school. Each member school is responsible for making this initial determination for its student athlete. A student athlete who has undergone sex reassignment is eligible to compete in the reassigned gender, provided such is not precluded by additional adopted bylaws or policy when 1. A student athlete has undergone sex reassignment before puberty, or 2. The student athlete has undergone sex reassignment after puberty under all of the following conditions. Surgical anatomical changes have been completed, including external genitalia changes and gonadectomy. Hormonal therapy appropriate for the assigned sex has been administered in a verifiable manner and for a sufficient length of time to minimize gender-related advantages in sports competition. And if a student athlete stops taking hormonal treatment, they will be required to participate in the sport consistent with their birth gender. Louisiana passed law in 2022 which bans participation in certain areas. As part of the Gender Equity Statement, the Louisiana High School Athletic Association, the LHSAA, has adopted position on gender identity participation. While this adopted position of gender identification is not LHSAA policy, it is intended to serve as a guideline to help direct the member schools and the LHSAA administration regarding student participation, regardless of their gender identity under certain circumstances. A student athlete shall compete in the gender of their birth certificate unless they have undergone sex reassignment. A student athlete who has undergone sex reassignment must go through the hardship appeal process to become eligible for interscholastic competition. The hardship committee shall consider all of the facts of the situation and shall rule the student athlete eligible to compete in the reassigned gender when 1. The student athlete has gone sex reassignment before puberty, excuse me, or 2. the student athlete has undergone sex reassignment after puberty under all of the following conditions. Surgical anatomical changes have been completed, including external genitalia changes and gonadectomy. All legal recognition of the sex reassignment have been conferred with all the proper governmental agencies, driver's licenses, voter registration, etc. Hormonal therapy appropriate for the assigned sex has been administered in a verifiable manner and for sufficient length of time to minimize gender-related advantages in sports competition. Athletic eligibility in the reassigned gender can begin no sooner than 2 years after all surgical and anatomical changes have been completed. Maine. The Maine Principals Association policy states that, consistent with its principles, the MPA believes that all students should have the opportunity to participate in MPA activities in a manner that is consistent with their gender identity, unless such participation would result in an unfair athletic advantage or would present an unacceptable risk of injury to other student athletes. Maryland protects transgender students against discrimination based on gender identity. The Maryland Public Secondary School Athletic Association has a policy which states each school system should develop and apply criteria for students to participate in interscholastic athletic teams consistent with their bona fide gender identity. Also, to ensure competitive fairness and equal opportunity to participate without discrimination, local criteria for transgender persons should reflect the following. A. Transgender students can participate on the interscholastic athletics team of the student's birth gender, or B. Transgender students can participate in interscholastic athletics teams of the gender that the student has transitioned to. This may be supported by medical documentation, hormonal therapy, sexual reassignment surgery, counseling, etc., confirming transition of gender. C. Transgender students may compete in the interscholastic team of the gender the student identifies with, as recognized by the local school system and established in official school system records. This may differ from the student's gender listed on school system records. In Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has a document called Guidance for Massachusetts Public Schools, Creating a Safe and Supportive School Environment, Non-Discrimination on the Basis of Gender Identity. This document outlines expectations for locker rooms and changing facilities, physical education class, and intramural and interscholastic athletic activities. The document says that, quote, where there are sex-segregated classes or athletic activities, including intramural and interscholastic athletics, all students must be allowed to participate in a manner consistent with their gender identity. Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association will rely on the gender determination made by the student's district, and it will not make separate gender identity determinations. Framingham, Massachusetts Public Schools created a transgender policy, and potentially the first of its kind in Massachusetts, which guarantees students the right to play on sports teams that align with their gender identity. And that was back in March of 2018. Michigan, the Michigan High School Athletic Association adopted a transgender policy at its May 2012 Representative Council meeting to approve policies and procedures by which the MHSAA Executive Director will determine the eligibility of transgender students in MHSAA tournaments. The document stating the policies and procedures is to be provided to schools when requested on a case-by-case basis. In 2016, the state of Michigan provided guidance instructing schools to allow transgender athletes to participate in accordance with their gender identity. The Minnesota High School Sports League allows participation for all students consistent with their gender identity or expression in an environment free from discrimination with an equal opportunity for participation in athletics and fine arts. The Minnesota High School Sports League voted in December 2014 to open up girls' sports to transgender student athletes. This decision took effect in the 2015-16 school year, making the state the 33rd to adopt a formal transgender student policy. We keep thinking all of this started with COVID. That is not the case. I've told you time and time again, this has been going on for decades. They have planned this all the way through, and they are destroying our children and destroying our nation with this ideology that they've got going on. The board set out criteria for determining whether transgender students who were born male but identify as female can be eligible for girls' teams at the nearly 500 schools in the league's membership. State law already permits girls to compete in boys' sports. The new process for establishing eligibility will include written statements from a student's parents or guardians and healthcare professionals regarding the student's consistent and sincerely held gender-related identity. A school's activities director will make the eligibility decision, with appeals being heard by an independent hearing officer. Religious-affiliated private schools will be exempt from complying with the league's new language. Mississippi state law passed in 2021 bans participation. The Mississippi High School Athletic Association has no policy on transgender athlete participation. While they have no policy, in April 2016, House Bill 1523 passed, allowing cover for those enforcing sex-specific policies for employees or student dress or grooming, or concerning access to restrooms, showers, dressing rooms, or locker rooms. This means trans athletes could be forced to use the restroom and locker room in alignment with the sex assigned on their birth certificate. Missouri state law passed in 2023 that bans participation in the opposite sex. The Missouri State High School Activities Association allows transgender males using hormone therapy, testosterone, to participate on a men's team, and allows transgender women to play on men's teams for the first year of documented testosterone suppression, after which she would be eligible to play on a women's team. A transgender student will be defined as a student whose gender identity does not match the sex assigned to him or her at birth as reflected on the student's birth certificate or school records. A transgender student must meet the following in order to participate in sex-separated interscholastic sports, so long as the athlete's use of hormone therapy is consistent with medical standards. A trans male, that's female to male, student athlete who has undergone treatment with testosterone for gender transition may compete on a boys' team, but is no longer eligible to compete on a girls' team without changing the team status to a mixed team. A mixed team is eligible only for boys' championships. A trans female, that's male to female, student athlete being treated with testosterone suppression medication for gender transition may continue to compete on a boys' team, but not compete on a girls' team without changing it to a mixed team status until completing 1 calendar year of documented testosterone suppression treatment. Montana passed law in 2021 that bans participation really from the opposite sex teams. The Montana High School Association has no policy on transgender athlete participation. In May of 2021, Governor Greg Gianforte signed into law HB 112, which states that students assigned male at birth may not participate in girls' sports in public, elementary, middle, high school, or college. It includes clubs and intramural sports. So, we will continue to look at the other states next week concerning transgender athletes. and then move on to the WPATH files again. In the meantime, if you would like to donate to Trials and Triumphs to help offset the costs associated with my research, you may do so via Cash App or Venmo to Ladena Bough, LadenaBough. I'll bid goodbye for now and look forward to visiting with you again next week. Be blessed.
To contact Trials and Triumphs, you can email Pastor Ladena Bough at trialsandtriumphs2@gmail.com. For more information, find Trials and Triumphs on Facebook and her podcast on Buzzsprout, as well as X under and Trials 56454 or Instagram.
You are listening to MTM Broadcasting, the Kingdom Building Station.
When the